I know a woman who has spent decades of her life being angry. She's just devoted to it. So after working with her for months, at some point I said, kid, you can find things to be angry about forever. You've been doing it for decades, so I'm sure you can do it for decades more. Or you can quit finding things to be angry about. You actually have to look for them. You do. They don't usually hit you in the head. You have to look around and find them. And she wrote back and said, yeah, I do reach for things to hang on to be upset about. It's, in fact, almost like I feel naked without something to be upset about. Lots of people do this. We're addicted to drama. It's exciting. We get a lot of attention. We can act like victims. We get a lot of power from being addicted to drama and finding things wrong and being angry. But at some point, it's like getting sober from cocaine. There's a seemingly endless supply of cocaine and alcohol out there too, but just because it's there doesn't mean we have to use it. So same with reasons to be angry. Yeah, there are plenty. I promise you, I have just as many as anybody else does. I just don't have to grab hold of everyone for dear life. You continue. I'm just so used to that feeling of being angry and victimized. There's got to be something that I can feel self-righteously outraged and offended about. It's an unhappy and ugly way to live. It really is. You say, my father used to mock happiness, make fun of happiness, like it was an urban myth. And he would pity the poor, ignorant fools who believed in it and chased it. And I learned to do the same. We do what we learn. I have heard highly intellectual people who are brilliant, but who are also emotionally challenged. And I've heard them make fun of happiness on a great many occasions. Intellectual snobs actually kind of enjoy that, as though happiness were for the stupid people who didn't have their eyes open, when in fact, intellectually focused people are missing kind of the whole reason to be alive. You continue, for the past year, you've been generously flooding me with regular doses of happiness and feeling loved. And yeah, I have, over and over and over again. Why? Because I really love you. I don't have an ulterior motive. It's not like, so you will do something, even for yourself, which is kind of absolute proof that love is possible, isn't it? People who say, well, this unconditional love just can't be. Well, I'm sitting right here, and though I'm certainly not a perfect example of it, I feel it, and so do a great many other people that I know. And happiness exists because I am. There were people who, after Columbus came to the New World, kept insisting that the world was flat, just as people who meet love and happiness refuse to acknowledge it. It's too upsetting to the world that they've created. In their defense, sometimes they just don't have a shelf to put it on in their brain, in their soul. They've been miserable and unhappy and angry, and along comes love and happiness. They don't recognize it. They don't have a category to put it in. You keep going. But each dose that you gave me was like a huge enema. I'm not sure I've had quite that mental picture before. Flushing out massive amounts of impacted emotional poop, detoxifying so much pain from my toxic emotional environment that part of me liked it, but part of me was confused. I get that. Love and happiness are confusing to people who never run into it. You say, when I was in a phase of experiencing the stuff that was flushing out, I would wonder if this love and happiness thing wasn't just a bunch of crap, because it was unsustainable. That's what I've been taught. And now I'm seeing that my volatile ups and downs were just detoxification episodes. Never heard it said quite like that, but yeah, makes sense. And now I'm feeling so much better because I kept it up, because I didn't quit. It's much easier now for me to feel loved and happiness. It doesn't disappear as quickly. Woohoo for you, kid. And as I see what I described, the random last vestiges of skepticism are also getting washed out, which makes my joy even greater. Happiness truly is an upward spiral. It just keeps getting better and better. And it really does. I probably say that at least once a day to somebody when they say, wow, I'm just loving this, because they're just experiencing their first moments of joy. Yeah, it's very cool, and you're going to like it even more. And those people, of course, months and years later say, I could never have imagined life being this good. We just have to not give up, just not quit. We keep going. We will find more. It's a guarantee. It's a lock. A man recently asked me, he said, I thought it was an odd question. He said, how come more people don't ask me how I'm doing? And I admit my initial response was, you're kidding. And he said, no. I said, all right, well, there's actually an answer to your question. All day long, you complain. All day long, all you ever talk about is me, me, me. How you're unhappy, how you don't like something, how you want more. And then you wonder why people don't ask about you. Well, why would they? How could they actually? What chance would they have? It's your only subject, so they figure you've got it covered. I've heard many victims do this, never heard them ask it quite in exactly that way, but victims are puzzled why people aren't more sensitive to them. They're so self-occupied, people just sort of back off and go, well, you've got this whole victimhood thing down. I don't need to add to it. New subject. I got a call from a woman whose boss gives her lots of projects at work, just piles them on, one after the other. And she called to say that she was feeling angry, frustrated, and controlled. So I just listened, just supported and loved her. And finally I said, so can you actually do the jobs that you're given? All these million jobs that he piles on. She said, well, most of the time, but while I'm working on one project, he gives me another one, and then another one, and it's really inconvenient, she said. Yeah, but he gets to give you work in whatever way he chooses because he's the boss. So you're frustrated that he's actually asking you to work for what he pays you. Does that make sense? And she said, well, I never thought of it quite like that. Well, new way to see it then. You begrudge him giving you the work you're paid for. She said, yeah, I guess I kind of do. So change your attitude. Your goal, the whole reason you work, isn't even to do the job. People misconstrue this. They'll say, well, at my job, they gave me something that's not part of my job description. No, our job is to support whoever our supervisor is and pretty much do whatever they ask us to do. Your goal is to support him. So imagine how your attitude would change if when he gives you a project, you say, it would be my pleasure. Not, oh, another project. Honey, you're paid to do this. You're paid enough that you have a house and car and you're able to support a kid and you're able to do a lot of other things in your life. It would be my pleasure. She said, well, I don't know if I could do quite that. Well, then learn how, because that's your job, to be supportive and to be willingly supportive. She couldn't quite let go of this. So she said, but what if he gives me too much to do? And that's a common thing at work, is that people have work just piled on them and then they feel overwhelmed. So I suggested, ask him for his priorities. So instead of feeling overwhelmed, which is just stupid, I mean, we only live right now. You can only do the next step in the next one job. You can't do 10 jobs at the same time. So instead of being overwhelmed and going, what do I do? Now I have 5 projects. Go to him and say, here are the 5 projects I have. And I'm getting a little bit uncertain as to, because I can't do all 5 at the same time, and I may not even be able to get all 5 done by the deadline. So can you point out the ones, point them out in order of priority? It would take the boss 30 seconds. I want you to do them in this order: 2, 4, 5, 3, 1, boom. Now you know which ones to do. Now you're not overwhelmed anymore because you've got a sense of direction. Or he may say, I want you to get 2 and 3 done on their deadlines. 4 is not quite as important. See, no more overwhelm, because you know what really matters to him, and the ones that could, be done whenever. Whenever I give people assignments, I've always done that for, oh my goodness, 30, 40 years now. When I give people lists of things to do, I label them. A, do it today. B, do it this week. C, whenever you get to it, so that people don't feel pressured to do everything all at once. And what happens is people are very busy, but they don't get the important things done first, and then they end up in trouble, and then they end up fired, and they don't know why. So she did this. She did everything I suggested. She went to work. She said, be my pleasure. Took the attitude that it was her job to support her boss, as opposed to resenting the guy who's paying her. And it was days later that she said, this is kind of fun. Yeah, it is. And it all depends on how we see things. No kidding. We change the whole world according to how we see it. A woman wrote me and said, my husband had a crappy day at work. He'd been promised a promotion, but it didn't happen in the time that he thought it would. And he was starting to get discouraged, and there were some other things that had not gone right, and he just wasn't all that happy. She said, I tried to be supportive. I really did. But then it all dissolved into my complaining about everything. How hard it was and how hard it is to be at home with the toddler, and how hard it is to blah, 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 blah. She just went complaining. And she continued and said, and what did he do? He just put aside his crappy day. He just kept saying, I'm so grateful for you. You mean so much to me. I love you and Susie, our daughter. After a while, I just couldn't keep complaining. It was over. This is husband Hall of Fame stuff here. This is the kind of stuff that if people paid attention, it would make all the difference in the world. Watch your partner's face. All the information you need usually is on your partner's face, running like those little stock market, I don't know what they used to call them, ticker tapes, but a moving sign, moving billboard across their face. They tell you how they're feeling. Only one person can be empty at a time, not 2. So you look at each other's faces. You gauge who is more needy. And usually this is done silently. And that person is then the center of attention. There's no discussion about fairness. Well, it's not fair that you get to have the attention. Nope. Whoever's most afraid and most needy, that's the person that gets it. There's no, well, now I'll pay attention to you if you pay attention to me later. No, you just tend to the needy or fearful person. If you don't, nothing good is going to happen, and you're going to be really sorry about it. Eventually, you will get what you want. You will get listened to. So lighten up and wait, like this woman's husband did. He just sat down his crappy day and he listened to her talk about her needs. You don't have to get what you want right now if your partner's needs or fears are greater. Oh, it's such a much easier and more pleasant way to be in a partnership. Now, different writer. And this is kind of similar to the one I just dealt with, but it's more long-term. A woman wrote and talked about how she and her partner seem to be in conflict all the time over just the littlest things, just goes on all the time. And I said, which of you has the greatest ability to put off your needs. I'm only talking to one of the partners. I said, in other words, if you don't get what you want temporarily, you, the person I'm talking to, do you tend to throw a fit? Or does that best describe your partner? She said, oh, my partner goes into a tizzy over next to nothing. She has to pretty much have her way all the time. So I said, well, then you are simply more equipped to make a commitment to no conflict. Your partner can't do it. There's no criticism about it. It's not like you're a better person than your partner. Your partner is just less able to defer frustration. So she did it. Instead of arguing about, well, it's not fair and, well, it should be equal. If you're looking for equal in a partnership, you're pretty screwed. A partnership isn't about equality. It's about each person bringing everything they have to the relationship and just blending it together. And then it belongs to everybody. So she did it. She deferred her needs to see to her partner's needs first over a more prolonged period of time, longer than this man that I was talking to is being in the Husband Hall of Fame. And she wrote, a couple of weeks later, she said, amazing. With a commitment to no conflict, with my commitment to no conflict, I can see finally how much control I really have over my own response. I can be more responsible. And if I am responsible, if I choose not to be in conflict, my partner is a lamb. She said, now, at first I thought it was a bit unfair, but it works. So I'm going to continue this and not worry about fair or who's first. Having conflict is just too dangerous. We got to do whatever it takes to get rid of it. And if only even one person commits to no conflict, pretty hard for the other person to engage in conflict when one person won't. Here's a story from about Sylvie from her mom. She said, we were in Sylvie's room and Sylvie began to sing some obnoxious song. Now, of course, that's in the eyes of her mother. I'm sure Sylvie thought it was a perfectly delightful song. You know how kids sometimes grab a hold of some cartoon song, some intro line from some children's show, and then they just sing it over and over and over on a feedback loop until you either go crazy or you start singing the song yourself in your head, and then eventually you go crazy with that too. And so her mother said, finally, Sylvie, that's enough. Sylvie looks right into her mother's eyes and says, Mom, this is my choice. She's 4. They were, after all, in Sylvie's room. And so her mother said, well, then maybe I'll go into another room where it's quieter and you can keep singing, which she did. What a beautiful thing to teach a child. We're always telling children, don't, stop, quit it, whatever. And it's things that are perfectly innocent. So if we're constantly telling our children no when they're having fun, what does a child learn? Having fun isn't okay. And then eventually they quit expressing themselves to us. And then when they get to be teenagers, we wonder why they don't talk to us more. No surprise. We've been so unpleasant. Why would they want to? Here's somebody who wrote and said, if your love for me is unconditional, and she was talking about me, then what is my love for you? Is it dependent? Is it conditional love? Is it an aspect of gratitude? Is it a mix? It's a lot of things. And since the person who wrote, although I can't remember exactly now who it was, is relatively new in real love, so it's somebody probably a year or less is my memory. When we tell somebody that we love them when we're relatively new at this, and we say that to somebody who's is unconditionally loving us, as I have been her, then what you're saying is you like how you feel when I'm loving you. And that is commonly expressed as, I love you, much like I love chocolate. I love the way you love me. To some extent, though, you do care about my happiness unconditionally, but at a minimal level, because at this point, you're pretty new at just the feeling of being unconditionally loved yourself. So your ability to love unconditionally is in its infancy just because you're new at it, not because you're not as good or I'm better, or no, just experience. And you love me more when I love you. So that would pretty much make it conditional, and again, entirely to be expected. Over time, this combination can change so that eventually the number two, which is you loving me unconditionally, could increase. Even while you're still enjoying number one, which is the you like it that I love you. I have seen this happen with my adult children. There have been moments when my adult children have called and expressed a genuine concern for how I'm doing. Unconditional love. I don't need their unconditional love. The relationship still stands. I'm still their parent, and it's my job to love them one way. But with maturity and experience, they have actually learned to feel some unconditional love for me. And I'm very happy about that. I'm very happy for them because I still don't need their love, although it's just fun to see, fun to feel. Interesting question, this next one. This person writes and says, are there actually any true extroverts? The only extroverts I've seen are just using approval or attention-seeking behavior. So is being an extrovert all just a fraud? I ask because I thought that I was an extrovert before real love. This is the person still writing. But I was just trying to fit in and get approval. I've talked to others who thought they were extroverts too. But after real love, they discovered that they were really not. They were really more introverted. I can enjoy being around people, but mostly now I prefer being quiet. Being around people is too much, kind of drains me. So I don't see it so much in terms of introversion, extroversion. I'll tell you how I see it, and you can see how it fits with your question. We all have true character traits, who we really are, that make up who we really are. And I tend to refer to those as gifts. They might be a combination of the DNA that we were born with, our native intelligence, some past experience, some spiritual qualities, traits, for example, that perhaps we brought with our spirits when we were born. Depends on your spiritual perspective. I have never seen one of these traits, one of these gifts, be bad. Never have. So, for example, some examples of genuine innate qualities would be tenderness, intelligence, emotional sensitivity, boldness. You can read a whole lot more about this in a blog from 16th of July, 2014. If you add love to a gift, much like water to a seed, it blossoms. If you add fear, it doesn't just distort the gift, it actually becomes destructive. So let's take, for example, tenderness. If you add love to tenderness, you get an increased ability to love. You have an increased sensitivity to feel your own emotions and those of other people. If you add fear to tenderness, you get actually more pain. People who are tender and injured or become frightened actually have more pain than other people. They become even hypersensitive. These people who are tender are more prone toward PTSD or PCSD. So whether tenderness becomes a good or bad thing, tenderness itself is a good thing. with love, but with fear, it's awful. Intelligence. Um, Intelligence with love would make somebody more capable of solving problems for the benefit of others and themselves. But if you add fear to intelligence, you get an increased ability to manipulate people, to deceive yourself, to be narcissistic, to justify pride. So fear plus intelligence, not so good. Boldness. Um, if you're bold and you feel loved, then you would be able to reach people that other people would not. You'd be able to reach people who are distant, who withdraw, who need more than just a casual brush with the experience of being loved. If you add fear to boldness, then you get intimidation, you get manipulation, you get anger, you get controlling. So our innate qualities are good, but they're poisoned by fear. So introversion versus extroversion, not so simple. I always thought, for example, that as a child that I was introverted. I was very alone as a child, moved every single year from kindergarten through 10th grade. So 11 years in a row of school, I moved to a different school. I was always the new kid. Felt alone. I was afraid. I was afraid of this constant newness, always being the new kid, left out of things. And my introversion was a product, not of who I really was, but a product of fear. It was not a primary quality. Now, I feel peaceful. I actually prefer quiet. I'd rather sit with Donna and do pretty much anything. More than 2 or 3 people to me is a crowd. But if I'm in a group of people who want to be taught the principles of real love, for example, I can become very extroverted. I can easily captivate a crowd of 5,000 people effortlessly, which is my boldness, which is an innate quality, coming out nourished by love. With fear, I just disappeared as a kid. So I can go back and forth from quiet, and I suppose you could call it introverted, to extroverted, according to what I'm doing and what I want to do. Abraham Lincoln described himself as, and I'm quoting now, a strange, friendless, uneducated, penniless boy when he came out of the backwoods of Illinois in his early 20s. Strange, friendless, uneducated. But he developed himself to the point that when needed, his boldness could lead a nation and cobble together a coalition of bitter enemies. He could lead men into battle. He could make enormously courageous decisions. He could entertain people at the White House. He could be an extrovert at parties. But he was known for being very quiet at home. In fact, his very first biographer, who did his first biography shortly after he died, said he interviewed more than 100 people to learn about Lincoln, and he said every one of them had a different opinion, and not one of them felt like they knew him well. So he was an introvert or an extrovert as needed. So I'm not sure that's an innate quality. So I don't see them as primary qualities. I'm neither, or I can be either, but they're kind of a result of our gifts or our traits, plus either fear or love or necessity. On the whole, what we see everywhere is the result of fear. So that would mean that 99% of extroverts or more are just getting praise and attention for themselves. Introverts, on the whole, in a world of fear, are simply protecting themselves. Extroverts tend to need the attention of others. Extroverts who are acting in fear, whereas an extrovert who doesn't need the attention of others does it for the benefit of others. Introverts who are afraid need to avoid the attention of others. So everything changes according to whether there's the presence of love or the absence of love? Good question. Never been asked that before, I don't think. Here's somebody who says, I feel so not confident about expressing how I really feel to people because I'm so sure that they won't receive it. Like, I really do feel grateful to people, but I just don't have the courage to express it. I tried today with a couple of people I knew because I was grateful for their patience and their generosity, but when it comes out of my mouth, it gets all mixed up with the people pleasing, and I'm not really sure whether I'm being sincere or not, or if they receive it sincerely or not. So I guess I'm just so much more obsessed with how other people receive me than with expressing myself. It really does get to be a muddle, isn't it? The problem is not trying to say it right. Sincere, the right words, no people pleasing and all that detail. That's not the problem. The problem is your fear of not doing it right. Not doing something right is no problem, because if you're not afraid, you can always correct it. Fear is your problem. The solution to the fear is easy. It's the solution to all fear. Trust. So I use the word trust a lot. So what would that look like here? Trust that you're already loved, that you have people that care about you. Trust that you'll learn simply as you have experiences. Trust that increasingly you'll be able to listen to that flow of the universe, call it God or whatever you want to, I don't care, where you will eventually be able to do it right, or at least, more productive, happier. Again, how do you trust? Remember first the love you have, then just act on how you feel. We fail to do that. When you get a feeling to do something, just do it. It will lead you to the right thing 9 times out of 10. It really will. Just express. You were saying, I worry about how to express my gratitude. Well, if you feel it, then just say it. Now, let's say it comes out 40% genuine gratitude and 60% people pleasing. Well, that would be actually to be expected in your case. Fine. Way better to express it wrong, if you like, 40-60, 40 pure, 60% people pleasing. Way better to do it wrong or not completely loving than to live in fear and not do it at all. Because then you learn from that experience and you move on to the next one and the next one, learning all the while. And as you learn, as you take the risk, as you just do what you feel, the proportions will change. You'll go from 40% real gratitude to 48 and 56 and 65, and you'll become increasingly more grateful in a genuine way as you simply practice and make mistakes. Almost nothing is more harmful than your fear of that thing. It's fear that's the great killer. You continue. The other day I texted Susie, person, and she told me that she got a job working with kids, and I told her I was happy for her because that's how I really felt. So you took a chance. You just expressed how you felt. But that's exactly the kind of thing that I would say to somebody in the past, and it wouldn't mean anything to them, and it would just be irritating. So you just do it like I was suggesting, as you did. And then you ask yourself how the experience went. In other words, what did you learn from it? Did you get a sense that you were asking her or saying that you were happy for her so she would like you? Just kind of get a feel. If you say, well, maybe a little, well, then you learn, so mostly you genuinely cared about her and a little bit of it was people pleasing. You learn from that just by asking the question, but you won't learn from it until you actually do it. If you sit and fuss about making a mistake, you don't learn a thing. Did you experience some real gratitude? Did you experience any fear as you talked to her? And you learn simply from the fact that you didn't die when you expressed yourself. It sounds like a silly thing to say, but no, it's not. One of the biggest things that keeps us in fear is that we're afraid some catastrophic catastrophic event will occur, something horrible, if we take a chance. If we take a risk and we do something new. No, you didn't die. So you learn from it, and then you move on to the next experience. Take a chance, learn, next. Poof. 1, 2, 3. Somebody wrote and said that they didn't quite feel like they were part of the community of the Real Love Facebook page and of their local community. And they said, and some people in the Facebook page are hypocritical. They don't live what they preach. Whatever. There will always be hypocritical people, kid. They have nothing to do with you. They have nothing to do with me. Now, about being part of the community. Some people really have a need to feel like they're part of the community, like being part of a herd. But some people, I'm one of them. I'm one of those weird people, never quite fit in. They're just different. There's just no place in the puzzle. They come along and the puzzle's, mostly put together and they bounce around from piece to piece. They just don't quite click. Different because of the way they feel, different because of the way they think. Much like the gifts that we just talked about. They're actual character traits. Some people's traits just have an unusual combination. These people who don't fit in the herd, I would call, and there are books about this subject, outliers. They're just different. They can't be average. They couldn't. And the herd doesn't quite understand them. And the outliers don't quite understand or fit in the herd. Well, that's really not a problem. You can only be who you are. Like I said, you have native characteristics, native gifts. That's you. The problem comes when an outlier wants the herd to accept them. If you're different, that's kind of tough on a herd. You can't expect them to be like you. You can't expect them to understand you. You can't expect them to accept you. Just as you wouldn't want to change who you really are to fit in the herd. So it's unavoidable, because we have the ability to choose, because we all have different traits, that there are going to be people who just don't quite fit in. But there are huge advantages to being different, to having different experiences, skills, and so on. Most of the great accomplishments in the world have been made by people who didn't fit in. I have read hundreds of biographies. Many of the people in the world that we call great, that did things that were, well, unusual, which is usually what makes people great. They did unusual things because they were unusual. And rarely did they fit in the herd. If they did, they would have stayed in the herd and never done anything different. Do you see? And yet, they can be an enormous advantage to the herd. Even though they don't quite fit in, they can sometimes lead the herd to better pastures. Or they can contribute characteristics to a herd that the herd wouldn't have without them. But there's still that whole not fitting in thing. It's uncomfortable, but you can only be you. Sometimes outliers do better connecting with just one or two or a tiny handful of people who do understand them. Often people who are outliers themselves. We're all just different. I know a lady in a large community, large real love community, who sometimes people say, well, she just doesn't fit in. And yet, whenever there's an oddball in the herd that needs help, the herd doesn't know how to help them. And so they send the oddball to this lady, to this outlier. And she can help people that none of them can. So, true, she's odd. She's not a team player, but she has enormous assets. Just be you. We're all different. It's very cool just to be ourselves. Here's somebody who says, last night my ex-partner made a date to Skype with my daughter, Hannah, who is age 6, at 11 in the morning. And Hannah woke up early and was really excited about it. And then 11 in the morning rolls around and there's no contact from the ex. So Hannah became upset. She's 6 years old after all, and she cries a bit. And I asked her if she wanted to talk about it. She was willing, and I said, "You're sad because Daddy didn't call you, aren't you?" She nodded, but she didn't want to talk about it anymore. So, an hour or two later, I noticed that she was kind of in a mood, whining constantly about everything. So again, I said, "Do you want to talk about it?" She asked if she could have 10 minutes. And that's her way, that's our way actually, of saying, "Mommy, I need your full attention right now." So when she says 10 minutes, Mommy puts down everything. So we sat on the couch and I asked her if she was still sad about the Skype call that didn't happen. She didn't answer me. She just wanted me to tickle her. So I did for a few minutes. Then I asked her again. She didn't want to talk about it and wanted more tickles. But I didn't do it this time because I knew that wasn't what she needed. You can't rely on a 6-year-old to tell you what she needs. She'll tell you what she wants. Ice cream and not to go to school for the rest of my life, obviously. So I told her that I wasn't willing to tickle her right then because what she needed was to be loved. This is a lovely story of parenting. She briefly protested, and I went back to my computer a few feet away. A couple of minutes later, she said, "Can I have some love?" So we sat together on the couch, and I suggested that she lay her head on my lap, and I just petted her head for a good 5 minutes. I could just feel her relax. Don't you just love even hearing this? Don't you wish it was your head? Music was playing in the next room, so Hannah started to sing it, but she changed the words. And here was the song she sang. "Loved, loved, loved. My mommy is so loving, loving, loving. I am so lovable, lovable, lovable." I don't know the tune of the song, or I'd do it for you. "I'm so happy and grateful." And then she just started cooing like a bird. Then we talked about Daddy not calling, and I asked Hannah why that might have happened. And she said, "Daddy is not loving." Now, this is a risky moment for a parent, when a child describes your ex as not loving, because there's that old adage, if you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. But kids aren't stupid. Don't lie to kids or they won't trust you. So this mother didn't lie. When the 6-year-old said, "Daddy's not loving," the mother said, "Well, that's pretty much true, but why isn't he loving?" And she said, "Because he wasn't loved." How sweet is this, 6 years old? She said it very calmly. "Dang," says the mother, "6-year-olds are smart." I asked her who did love her. And she looked at me with a big smile and pointed at me. And I said, "Yep, and you can feel that. I can tell. I had a great morning loving my little one on the couch and just wanted to share it." It's just out of the parenting book. Better. It's a great story. And this is how you go about loving a child. If you do that consistently, children end up happy. No kidding. I can't count how many parents have written to me about a child whose behavior was just utterly unacceptable. And what could they do about it? What consequences could they apply? Well, but have you loved your child first? Well means no. Well, go do that. That's what changes your child the most. A man wrote, "People feel our feelings and intentions toward them." He said, "I sent an email to my boss the other day. It was very polite." Now, in his defense, I have read things he's written, and this man can write absolutely graciously. So I believe him. He continues. He says, "I asked for some help on doing a job that I was doing for the boss, but inside I was resenting him. In fact, I was hating him. I was hating him that I had to ask him for help for everything, and that I always had to wait. He does this all the time to me." And he didn't respond. So the next day I sent the same email, identical. But I had changed my attitude. I didn't hate him. He responded within 5 minutes. Now, I'm not going to tell you that the boss felt the vibrations, but I've seen it too many times to discount this possibility. I see it a lot. We say the right words, we're clever in our wording, but our delivery is not loving. We don't feel loving, so people react badly. And this example that he gave was by email. In person, it's really obvious. And often we don't say words as right as we think we do. Commonly, people will send me emails that they're going to send to their spouse or a child or a parent or whatever, and they say, "Now, I just want you to read it over. I've removed all the blaming and accusation from the letter. I just want you to review it." And there's blaming and accusation in every single sentence of the letter or the email. So when we're afraid and empty and blaming, we're not very good at judging what we're doing. This is a story about Zoe, who's 18 months old. And her mother says, Zoe loves to pray. On her own, she'll fold her hands before a meal and bow her head and say, prayer. Especially when she can tell that there's any tension, she asks my husband and I to pray. She physically folds our hands together and says, prayer. So here's an 18-month-old child who can sense that there's tension between her parents, and she's pretty much ordering them to solve it. That's pretty clever at 18 months old. Let's see. I'm going to put an asterisk by that. Give me a sec. Here's a woman in a pretty unhappy marriage. And both she and her husband, highly intellectual, highly skilled, highly accomplished in their respective fields. And she learned about real love, and it's just transformed her life. She's happier, she's more peaceful. She's actually changed her professional field as a result of real love. She just couldn't keep doing the field that she was in. He, on the other hand, utterly refused to do anything about real love. I saw them not long ago, and she just jumped up into my arms and wrapped her arms around my neck and squeezed me to death. And I went to hug him, and he turned sideways and did his impression of an ironing board. He's just too afraid. He's completely stuck in his head. On one occasion, when I was trying to work with him, he said to me, now that she's learned real love, she's boring. I said, meaning what? How could she become boring? He explained that one of the things that he really enjoyed about her was the intellectual discussions that they used to have, where they would disagree, argue, even be combative. So it turns out that one of the things that he enjoyed about her was the intellectual combat that they used to have. It was the only form of enjoyment he has, is in his head. And so now that she'd become peaceful and didn't enjoy fighting him intellectually, he finds her not interesting. He could only enjoy what he was used to. The thing is, she has found something that has made her profoundly happy. Love. He uses his intellectual combat as a very brief form of superficial enjoyment. And when the conversation's over, so is his enjoyment. So she's found something much more lasting than he has. Here's somebody who writes, I am learning from a 2-year-old. Yesterday, my granddaughter was building something, and my granddaughter, Anna, and I was working at my desk with my back to her, and she screamed, "No, Guga," which I assume is a term for grandmother, because little 2-year-olds make up words for it, because grandma apparently is pretty difficult. I turned around and said, "What do you want?" She didn't have words for it, but she seemed okay. So I turned back around and she said no again in a really upset tone. I turned around, she was fine, started building again, and I said, "Anna, if you want me to see what you're building, so pay attention. Grandma's doing what parents can do." She understood what the child was saying. The no wasn't something was wrong, well, sort of. The no was, stop doing what you're doing and pay attention to me. With a 2-year-old, you often have to experiment to figure out what it is that the kid is saying, because no is the only word that they know. But we can train them to use more words, and that's what this woman's doing. So grandma said, "Anna, if you want me to see what you're building, say, please turn around." So I turned around back to what I was doing, and she yelled, "Turn around, please, Kuka." So I turned around and we stacked her playthings and knocked them down, and we tested this new way to ask a few times. Later she came over and I was in another place, and again she said, "Turn around, please," but this time in a normal voice, no yelling. So the kid was trained to say, "Turn around," instead of just going, "No, no." And the kid was trained in 4 times of practicing. I was in the airport yesterday, and we were in a very long line for passport checking. And there was a little girl who was probably 5, so way older than this 2-year-old. And this 5-year-old little girl walked up and down this very long line of people, screaming like she was being tortured, just shrieking and tears and shaking her head and marching up and down. You'd have thought she was alone. But then eventually it became obvious that periodically she was passing by her parents, both her mother and her father, who paid her no attention whatever. I wanted to go up to the parents and say, "I'd like to introduce you to your daughter, because apparently you've forgotten who she is." But I didn't think that they would find that as funny as I did. They hadn't trained her just to talk about what she wanted. So instead, this child is a shrieking, crazy kid at 5. Now imagine what she's going to be like when she's 14 and doing absolutely everything wrong. And the parents are going, "How did this happen?" And it's because they didn't listen to her when she was 5 or 2 or 10 or 14. This grandmother continues, "This is what real love has been teaching me. That I get to ask for what I want. And if I don't know how to ask, I can be taught, just like I taught my granddaughter. No criticism, no frustration, just lovingly taught. When I learn how to do something, it's usually easier than what I was doing before. And it's so less straining on my soul. How lovely would it be if we could all be taught in as sweet a way as you taught your granddaughter, and learn as quickly as she did." Very cool. Here's somebody who says, "A few years ago, my ex-husband had an affair and began using cocaine and a bunch of other drugs. So I took the bull by the horns and suggested an intervention a couple of years ago, and then again a month later, and he said, I don't need any of that foolishness. And his actions continued. So I made a conscious decision, in other words, the infidelity and the drugs, I made a conscious decision to move forward with my life. I moved out and we were divorced. Well, good for you, honey. You believed his behavior instead of his promises to do better, which is what all addicts make. I'm currently involved with an ugly custody battle. I'm fighting for my 3-year-old son. So why do I allow myself now, after all this time, to trust my ex after he's had a few good weeks, knowing that it's all going to hit the fan at some point. I trust my coach. She named her coach. This is a business transaction with my ex. I know that I don't owe him anything, but I'm not staying detached from him. I'm at about 95% with this. And it's all about my son. I have zero unhealthy regret about our divorce. The truth is, what I worry about is my son not having his father in his life, which he would only be about 2% of the time. So I feel like I trust my coach, but she tells me to quit worrying about what my ex feels, and I keep wanting to involve my ex in my son's life. What's happening is that you're letting your fear cloud your reason and your intuition. You have already know for a fact, you're certain that your ex will screw things up. But you don't want your son later to wonder why you didn't do more to ensure that he had a father. And you're genuinely concerned for your son, that he have a father. But see, his father has already made the choice not to be one. He's proved it by his actions, by his infidelities, by his continuing use of drugs. So quit doubting yourself. Don't let your fears rule you. Quit hanging on to hopes that have no foundation. Just let your ex go. Now, if he proves himself later over a period of, at least a year or so, that he's capable of being a father, well, then you might reconsider. You might reconsider allowing, your son to spend some time in your ex's life. But in the meantime, you don't need to have your son around that. And you don't need to agonize that you somehow are cheating your son. Your ex made the decision to cheat your son. And now you're just accepting your ex's decision and you're just letting him go. We have this tendency to we want to hang on to dreams. Understandable. Dreams keep us going. But we can't deny what we see. It will help you enormously to stay with your coach. Keep finding love from your coach. Trust your coach. Trust other wise men and women. Remember the love of your coach and other wise men and women, and practice sharing love with them. And just let your ex be a thing of the past. And then you'll discover that the love that you have for your son is enough. Your child needs one loving parent. It would be lovely if your child had two, but one focused, loving parent is a whole lot better than two semi-focused, half-loving people. So focus all your attentions on your kid and let your ex go. Advice that we could all do with: find it, trust it, remember it, and share it with others. And the result is predictable. Great questions. Look forward to seeing y'all in a week. Thanks.